Hi, my name is Rosie. I'm from Mercier, Quebec, Canada, and I grew up attending Catholic and Pentecostal churches. My family grew up being Catholic, and so being Catholic was kind of like all they knew. And so I started off going to Catholic church as a kid, did my, communion and confirmation, that kind of thing. But I guess along the way, there was a lot of religious manipulation within the family and also what I was getting from church. Fear was drilled into the brain. God is not our friend. He is an authority figure and he's someone that we should fear because there's punishment for like everything. So from a pretty early age, I would say that there was a lot of reluctant obedience to things like the Ten Commandments to things of the Bible just because it was obedience out of fear and not because it was what was, let's say, good for me. My grandmother became the rebel in the family. She was an immigrant from Italy. And at some point, she started going to a Pentecostal church. So it was like, like, oh my God, she left Catholic church and she's attending Pentecostal churches. Like this is crazy. But her being there, I think, was good for me because she's the one that introduced me to it and she brought me to her church. And so at the time I was part of like the kids choir and the kids group and stuff like that. The thing that was really powerful for me to witness with the Pentecostal church was the baptisms. In Catholicism, you get baptized as a baby, but in the Pentecostal church, you get baptized as an adult. Witnessing that helped to start changing my perspective a bit of God and hearing people's testimonies of how he worked in their life. I was still afraid of God, but I felt like, oh, well, if all these people are saying so many good things about God and how he's done wonders in their life, then maybe there's more to this. So I attended the Pentecostal church for several years until the community started to involve themselves in our family life, and there was a lot of friction between my mother and my grandmother. Ultimately, the congregation blamed me at 13 as the grandkid for not being the person to make peace between my mom and my grandmother. I'm 13. That's not my responsibility in life. That's an adult problem. And I was in the crossfire. And it really repulsed me from church. That was like the one place I was going to. I had friends and I was learning something. And it was supposed to be a positive environment for me to learn something. And then I would get this crap from the community and feel like, why am I the bad person in all this? Like I'm just the kid here. I can't delve into the issues of my family. It bothers me just like it would anybody, and I can't do anything about it. It put a sour taste in my mouth and I stopped going. Family burdens became more intense at home and like there's a lot more friction within the family. Those obstacles and those issues in the family reinforced a lot of the Catholic principles of fear. I felt like all these bad things that were happening were God's punishment towards me for something that I did that I don't know what I did, but I'm a bad person, so everything bad that happens is because I deserve it. I would say the guilt and shame came around sexuality. That was like another thing. Like having teenage hormone rages and like just thinking something impure, I felt embarrassed about it. So I would never talk about it, but just knowing that it was happening was like, ooh, I could go to hell for this. So speaking with other Catholic attendees, there was always this echoing of just pray about everything, and it was very passive and like if bad things are happening, well, maybe you're doing something wrong. So I didn't feel any kind of solace within the Catholic community. And the Pentecostals at this point, I had left the church just because how they were like meddling in my family life and I didn't feel supported or helped. I felt just victimized or targeted as the root of all evil in the family. So at that point, I had a lot of bitterness and anger towards God. I felt like, well, what's the point of trying to be good if I'm always being punished? So I spent a lot of my adolescence really angry. And I would say that in the process, I never felt like God didn't exist. For me, the scale never tipped quite that far. I always still believed he existed, but I always believed that he was just only somebody to fear. So my adolescence was very angry, and it was like me wanting to be rebellious, but never having the courage to do it because I still felt like I would go to hell. I had all these like really bad thoughts. I was like, you know what? Well, my parents would be really mad if I drank or if I smoked. I'll do it anyways. But no, I can't. And there was like a lot of noise in my brain. And unhealthy places to put anger and to put fear because it was always God against me for like everything. I would say like the primary guilt and shame thing that I experienced, and probably like the only department that I've experienced it in, was around sexuality and discovering yourself. I know that my mom had a lot of guilt and shame around that because that's how she was raised too. That was definitely passed down. But I guess where I was very lucky to not experience it long term was that as a musician, I grew up in a lot of musical circles, and a lot of musicians that I was around were atheist. And so for them, their whole outlook on it didn't involve guilt and shame. Hearing them speak like it was very normal, we are sexual beings, and just because they were atheists didn't mean that they didn't still value sexuality. So I want to make that distinction too. It's not to say that like that atheists are like sexually liberal people necessarily. It's just that they didn't identify sexuality exclusively with God and something to be ashamed of. Hearing them speak about it like it's a human thing, it's normal, it was like, oh, well, then if everyone experiences these feelings, then why am I the odd one out? Having that question in mind at a relatively young age helped me to start fighting it earlier. Then when I was an adult, I didn't feel like weird or anything. It was just, okay, well, it's something that we all experience. It's just how I deal with it is going to define how I am. I hopped around to a lot of churches when I was like my late teens, early 20s. I couldn't really pinpoint manipulation in churches or even amongst the congregation. And I only started to like pick up on that when I was maybe 24. One of my friends introduced me to a Baptist church. At the time that he found this church, he was an atheist that was starting to explore. And I was like the confused Christian, I guess you could say. So he brought me to this Baptist church and we sat through the service. And what the pastor did at the time that resonated with me is that he opened up the newspaper, picked a topic, and then preached on it cold. I don't remember exactly what the topic was about, but I remember thinking, wow, this is like real world application. I'm not just sitting here to be told what to do. It's like theory and application, which is how I need to learn things. Not just like, these are the rules, you follow all this, and like magically you'll be saved and everything will work out in life. Because of that first service that I walked in on that day, I just kept going to this church. And I found that there were people that just were curious about who I was, and I didn't feel like particularly judged or anything. It was just people attending church with no fancy clothes and no like fashionable handbags like I would usually see in a Catholic church. They were just everyday people, and this pastor was just giving a sermon. So I would say that I only started to turn things around when I was around 24, 25. There was a lot of internal conflicts for me to figure out, like, is what they're saying true? Why does everybody look so peaceful? That was like a big thing for me, is like going to church, I always felt like I was an outsider because people had this image of being at peace and loved, and there was all this joy. And I was like, well, how come I don't feel any of that? I believe that he exists. I believe that God exists, but I don't feel joy. I don't feel love. I don't feel peace. I don't feel any kind of hope. So what is it that these people are so ecstatic about? That was the big turning point for me to realize that there was definitely more. What I was learning and what I was being told also, like at home, because of how my grandparents went to Catholic church and learned all this Catholic stuff, that this like list of rules, it's not human to keep up with it. We can't just live up to a set of rules all the time. We're always going to fall short. And that was ultimately what the Bible preached over and over and over and over again. And that's where you needed Jesus to be able to have the strength to overcome or to be carried through things. And so slowly and surely, I'm debunking a few things for myself and making sense of things and trying to take in new information without the information of before, that he's just there to punish me, because ultimately that's like not the case. It's been a long like journey of undoing. I'm transitioning away from, I would say, like religion. It's important to make the distinction that there is religion and then there is Christian faith. I don't think that they're the same thing. Faith has always been a thing that's been part of the Italian culture, which my grandparents are Italian. So being Catholic was always like the thing to be. And they just went to mass because they were supposed to, and were told repeatedly to not steal and not lie and not this and not that. And then they would ultimately not practice it. Not truly. I know my grandparents sure as hell didn't. That's where like I think the doctrine comes in, because then you're just told to do things. Who, what, where, when, and why. That's where I would say that I've moved away from religion and trying to learn more about the Christian faith, period. I would say my friend that brought me to the Baptist church was probably the pivotal point for me, because I would have never considered going to another church. I was just angry and I didn't have any intention of necessarily looking for another place. I was just upset. So I think his encouragement went a long way for me. And then the way that the church conducted itself helped me see a better example of healthy dynamics, or also like relationship between pastor and congregation. For me, they were an example of some more selfless behavior. They didn't force you to give a donation. They just said it was there if you wanted to give, and that they didn't want to receive any donations that didn't feel natural to you. And that was the first time I ever even heard that. In the Catholic churches that I went to, they put this focus on monetary contribution. But what I learned from this other place that I went to was that it doesn't have to be monetary. If you didn't have money to give, like if you donated your time, you volunteered, or you did outreach in the community for something, that those are all ways to like donate to helping the church. When I didn't feel pressured even to give money, it was like, oh, okay, wait a minute here. Like, this is different. This is new. They knew I was a musician, and they just said, if at any point you want to participate in the worship team, that's your way of donating to the church. So I did. I played piano for the church, and like, that's it. I had all these other alternatives. I never felt bullied or pressured into anything. I never felt like there was like a negative consequence if I decided not to do something. And so this is where I guess I started to learn about more healthy dynamics. And then after some time, like that I was at this Baptist church, I went to this Pentecostal church that I had gone to as a child. And going back as an adult with this perspective of the Baptist church, I saw a few things at this place that screamed manipulation. Just as an example, they were in the middle of worship. They had a full band. It was really like inspiring and light show and the whole thing. And I was like, wow, like this is cool. Like the Baptist church I went to was a really small, cozy little place, old church. And nothing like that. So seeing the band at this Pentecostal church was like, wow, so impressive. But then in the middle of worship, I saw one of the worship leaders started to tell people, like, put your hands up, turn your life over to Jesus. And it was like this whole thing, like it was like a big show. And I remembered like I had goosebumps out of panic. I felt like in that moment, because music changes you emotionally, you are influenced. And like being convinced in a moment of vulnerability to turn your life over to Jesus is a fake action to me. That is not like a sound, conscious decision that you've made. You've made it when you were in euphoria. So when I saw that, I kind of panicked, because I was like, well, all these people that are going to become Christian today are doing this impulsively, emotionally, and not because they have any grounding or foundation to even know what they're getting themselves into by saying that I'm Christian. Christianity then gets a bad rap for saying like, oh, people that say they're Christian like end up dropping away from faith, or people that have once been saved lose their salvation. No, they turned their life over in vulnerability, and not because it was a real sound decision. They didn't lose their salvation, they just never had it because they didn't willingly, soundly make that decision to start with. Another thing that I had picked up on was also about donations. They did this whole big like band show for like the worship team and this, that. And then all of a sudden, some guy comes up on stage and starts talking about the donations. You have to give, because if you want to continue having Sunday mornings like this, give. There's a lot of pressure about it because of the maintenance of the building and this and that, whatever. I understand. The church has to be able to operate. I get it. But there was no options about volunteering. It was just give your money, e-transfer, auto deposit, automatic withdrawals, whatever it was. They wanted to just always secure the bag. I grew up praying, and I always did. But this is the part that I'm still like, I guess, working through as an adult, is trying to understand really what it means to commune with God and not just like treat him like a wishing well. Because talking to him, making my list of requests, giving my gratitude and all these things, I don't necessarily have a spiritual experience when I do it. For example, Pentecostals, when they say that they'll start talking in tongues, I find that confusing, because according to them, I'm not saved, because if I haven't spoken in tongues, then I don't have the Spirit in me. Okay. So if I never speak in tongues, that means that I'm just gonna go to hell because I don't have this like gift of tongues, or the Spirit didn't come over me and possess me. So I don't have the spiritual experiences that some of the Christians that I've spoken to have said that they've experienced. That's something that I'm wrestling with, is trying to draw the line between what's religion and what's Christian faith fact. A lot of Pentecostal churches like really maintain that in order to be saved, you have to speak in tongues. Others don't. You get like some muddy waters, because it's not every Pentecostal church that even preaches that. It just depends who the pastor is that's shepherding at that time. I never volunteered myself to speak in tongues because I couldn't. I would be lying. So right now I split my time between a Baptist and a Pentecostal church, but this Pentecostal church that I go to specifically like almost never talks about tongues. I've never seen anyone in there speak in tongues. I've never seen anyone request anyone to do it, or to push people to do it, or even to stress that you're only saved if you can. Never. This particular pastor, he takes the book and he's like, okay, like this is what it said. This is what it says. This was the context in history. And he kind of like breaks things down in this way to describe context. Everyone that wants to be smart with their Christian like verses and stuff, they're always like spewing things from the Bible and it's out of context. And then people are getting upset. People are getting scared. Okay, well, like, what's the context? If it was at a time that you're saying women had to be silent, Well, maybe in that culture at that time, women had to be silent, but that's not because Jesus is telling women to shut up. So I think that there's like a lot of unnecessary drama around the things that Jesus wants of people because everything is just being used liberally to defend an argument that was never made in the first place. There have been like debates with like Islamics and Jews and things like that. And the thing is always like, how do we know which one is right? In a sense, you have to be open to allowing God to reveal himself to you. And I can't say that I'm like an expert in that because I mean, no one is. But if you're really open about knowing what the truth is, I think you'll be led to it. If you're like really hungry to know what the truth is, I think the truth reveals itself to you. If you ask me like which one's true, like Catholicism or Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever, to be honest with you, I would say that none of them are true. I think that none of them are true, but I think that all of them are almost true. And that's where I think is like the work of Satan in a sense, because Jesus didn't come and leave a religion. Jesus came to preach the gospel. He came to like tell people about God. He left the Bible as a manual for life. He came to warn us about Satan, how to find eternal life in him, like things like that. So if he came to preach that, then basically all these other like religions or sects that came out of it are like act of Satan in dividing the one true church. I think that we're all born with a moral compass. It's part of our blueprint as humans. We come to earth with a certain package of talents, with skills, and with some sort of moral compass. And then I think it's how we nurture that compass that's going to determine what we do with it and like how we conduct ourselves. I know some atheists that are moral. They hold values that Christians would, but they don't believe in anything. And I know others that are just loose with everything. It's like there is no right. They don't believe in a right and a wrong. They think that everything is subjective. They just think that there's yin and yang, and like for every good you're gonna have a bad, and that's life. I think it's impossible for us to reject the possibility of something bigger than us. I think that there's too much evidence in our day-to-day life that there is something more than just us. So I think it's a bit ignorant for atheists to disqualify that. I've heard some say that they feel like they are gods unto themselves, that they make all their own decisions, and that if they're moral, it's because it was their choice. I don't fully agree with that. I do think that the more knowledge and wisdom that you have in a faith, the more you're nurturing your compass. You might have more clarity in what you're doing or in how you feel about something, in your judgment. I consider myself lucky that right now I'm in like two churches that have shown me some healthy examples of dynamics. But I think that when you're just starting out in attending church or you're trying to find a church, maybe you've moved to a new city, I think it's really important that you have your community of your friends and family and people that you trust, and also the community of your faith, because you're not going to see clearly unless you have the full picture. And you're not going to get a full picture from just one side. I'd like to believe I'm going to go to heaven. I would like to think that when I die and maybe meet Jesus, he's going to be like, good job, kid. You did good. I'd like to think that. My atheist friends think that there's nothing, that like we just die and like it's over and that's it. But I find that like so hard to believe. I find it so hard to believe that our souls just came here and then they go nowhere. I just feel like it's hard to imagine that you're here for no reason at all and that you go nowhere at all, and basically that there was no purpose. Like, why did you come all this way? Sometimes I even wondered if Earth was actually the hell that was talked about in the Bible. I was like, maybe life is like so shit that this is actually the hell that they're talking about. I'm like, does it really get worse than this? I don't know. But I take comfort in the biblical perspective that God knew us before we were here, which means that like each soul is unique and each soul was like custom made. And if that's true, then I don't think that we can reincarnate into something else because we already came here as what we were supposed to be. Now, if I flirt with the idea that energy just keeps reincarnating, then I guess that would lend itself to like karma, because then you reincarnate as something trash because maybe you were a bad person. But then you spend the rest of your like soul time being punished. Isn't that hell too?